Good. So fortunately, Peter and I had a talk before the presentation. So obviously nothing that you will hear now is overlapping with what he told you. Even though I have to tell you on some elements, I'm a bit more optimistic than he is. So for all the Portuguese and non-German cultivators here in the room, I think there will be a chance that you might export into Germany. However, I will tell you a bit about that in my presentation. So, potential scenarios for legalization in Germany. When I looked at the agenda, almost every presentation has this name. So I hope actually I'm not saying something completely wrong from what the other said, or I'm not hoping that I'm boring you by just saying exactly the same things. However, obviously, what you see right now, everyone in Germany talks about legalization. So it's a big topic in the news. Every day we hear something new. And to be honest, even for me, who's been in the cannabis space for now 5 years and who has been an activist for more than 20 years for the legalization, it is quite surprising for me because, you know, when you're an activist, like in the sense that I fought for a legalization politically already in 2001, you get a lot of disappointments on the way. And whenever a politician said, let's do this, you start to develop a mistrust and say, like, maybe he says that, but he will not do it. So when Germany put it into the coalition contract, it was already a big surprise to me. But then the fact that they followed on, and more politicians are actually talking about it, and they even giving tighter timelines than Peter and I would have thought they would give. I think that's a very good sign that something is really happening there. And you mentioned this just now. The hearings just started this week. There will be 5 hearings this month. So they're really serious. Something is happening in the background. And that's actually a very good news. So, but as we just learned as well, there are a lot of questions open. Like, what about import? What about edibles? What about advertising? What about EU GMP? What about Schengen? We just talked about it. What about local cultivation, pharmacies, dispensaries? There's a lot of open questions. And my presentation today is not to answer all those questions, but my presentation is today to give you an insight what we as a company believe might happen based on everything that we heard over the last weeks. And when I mean what we heard over the last weeks, it's not like I'm listening to the radio and think what's happening, but what we have as Sanity Group, we have a 5-people public affairs team for already 3 years. And obviously during those times, we talked a lot to politicians. And even in the last month, we had the chance to talk with a lot of politicians behind the back and really see what they think is going on. The good news is, they're all wanting to make this happen. The bad news is, I think not many of them have a really clear idea of where they want to go. However, I think over the next weeks, we'll probably see a good development in that direction. So, what do I do to tell you today? I will tell you something about the legalization. Is it a crystal ball? No, in this case, as I just mentioned, we have a public affairs team. We had over 15 background discussions alone in the last month. We actually discussed our position papers, fact sheets with the politicians. We actually talked to a lot of politicians, not only in Germany, but also in Canada and Portugal. There's obviously a previous draft of a law in Germany called the Cannabis Control Gesetz by the Green Party that gives you probably already an indication of a blueprint of some aspects where they might go to, but then obviously triangulating all these different views and trying to make an opinion out of that. So generally, we see 3 big topics that are unclear today. Number 1 is distribution and marketing. So where is cannabis sold? How can you inform about cannabis? And what will be the regulations around that? The second big topic, we just heard about that, is sourcing and production. Will it be German? Will it be international? Can it come from the EU? Can it come from any country in the world? Are we just using the medical supply chain? Probably most likely not. However, that's a big question. And then the last one, what kind of products can we market? Is it just the flower itself? Is it pre-rolled joints? Is it vape liquids? Yes or no? Is it maybe even edibles? Is it chocolate? Is it drinks? Is it actually opening everything like in Canada? Or do we just start with the flower itself and then we wait for 5 years what's happening? And then we actually take it from there. So there are actually obviously a lot of questions. And I think you heard those questions quite a lot today. So as I mentioned, my answers today will not be the final answers, but will be what we believe based on the discussions we had, where the discussion in Germany might go to. But what I'm not covering today is what Peter just covered, is the taxation and the deep dive on international law, because what politicians want to do versus what they can do is very often 2 different things. And that's the reason why I'm looking more what the politicians want to do. If they make it happen in the back and see if they find a solution for the EU law or for the international law or the inter se procedures versus the UN Narcotics Drug Convention, we need to see. But Everything I tell you today is definitely not the final truth, but everything today is what I believe might happen based on the discussions I heard. Good, so that's a big slide. So I'll try to make it a bit easier to digest. So what we were wondering in the beginning as Sanity Group, when the legalization was on the topic for the first time, is like, what do we believe might happen in terms of distribution and marketing? And what we did also was we looked in other countries and said, what's going on there? What happened in Uruguay? What happened in Canada? What happened in the US states? And at the end of the day, we found kind of 5 different scenarios that we believe might happen. The number 1 scenario is something that was already discussed already before the election by the Liberal Party. Christian Lindner even said it in a very early statement, saying that he thinks the normal distribution channel for cannabis should be the pharmacies. So, and that is actually what's more or less happening in Uruguay. It's the pharmacies who are handing out cannabis. So basically what us, for a German cannabis company, that's the easiest way because we already sell cannabis to the pharmacies today. It's medical cannabis, so if you can just use the same supply chain to also sell recreational cannabis, easy. However, I think there are some disadvantages in this scenario, and especially what was said before, if it's about drying out the black market, there are some things you need to make sure you meet. And the requirements are availability, so it needs to be available ideally everywhere, because that actually makes it easier for people to access cannabis compared to contacting their dealer. Number 2 is definitely price. Number 3 is convenience. It's about how the product gets delivered to your house. And number 4, it's also the price. So the taxation, we come to that a bit later on. However, we strongly believe that the pure pharmacy case, and we see that in Uruguay, will not lead to a booming recreational market because the distribution will be too narrow. The second thing that we see, for example, in Montreal or in Quebec, it's that you have dispensaries, but they're run by the government. So not everyone kind of is like this. It's just a specific thing in Quebec, but the government is running those stores. So that's a theoretical option. I don't think it will happen, and it was never really discussed by the politicians. So I don't go deeper into that. The third one is the licensed stores or dispensaries. That's what we know from Canada. That's what we know from California. So that is actually a model that this definitely also has the disadvantages. But we believe that this is something also what we hear from the German government that they want. Then the fourth one is a hybrid model. It means you allow every pharmacy who wants to sell cannabis, but on top you ensure availability by also allowing dispensaries to open, especially in the geographies where you don't have a good availability. And then last but not least, it's the open market. You might think it's ridiculous that you can go to a supermarket and buy your cannabis there. However, if you talk to some of the politicians, especially from the Greens and from the Liberals, there's definitely a fraction of the government that even has sympathies for the open market, saying why shouldn't a tobacco store or a wine store not also selling cannabis? Because what we hear, especially from the Greens and the Liberals, less so from the Social Democrats, is that there is a certain desire to put cannabis, tobacco, and alcohol on the same regulation level, while the Social Democrats are still more on the medical side, and they see cannabis as something that shouldn't be regulated as tobacco and alcohol. However, we see there are some definitely interest in the fifth model as well. However, what we believe will happen, and I think that's not a big surprise to anyone here, our strong opinion is that there will be a hybrid model. So it will be licensed dispensaries and it will be pharmacies. So our position as Sanity Group is obviously we want to make sure that as many point of sales as possible can sell cannabis. Why? Because we learn from other countries that if you limit it too much, the black market will not be dried out. We see it actually in the different provinces of Canada, in the provinces where you only have a few stores, where you have to travel 50 kilometers to go from your house to a dispensary. The black market is still much bigger than in other jurisdictions where you actually can even have it delivered to your house, like in Toronto. So obviously that's something that we want. We also prefer that the number of licenses are not capped. And that's a discussion we just had with the government or with government officials 2 weeks ago. It's the question, do you want to make a cap saying per 50,000 inhabitants you have one store and then you give capped license to a tender process? Or is it that you can actually apply and as soon as you meet the requirements, you get the license granted? And we believe that it should be the second way. It's not yet clear where the government will go, but that's our position. And then obviously, well, this is actually our background. Originally, we, the founders from Sanity Group, came from e-commerce and tech background. So obviously that's our home turf. So we actually believe that especially in areas that are not really served, e-commerce could be an interesting option. And then also what we actually believe is, or we prefer, we want to inform customers about the product. So that's something that I think should be important. And that's also part of the discussions we have with politicians. We shouldn't just bring the product into the market without informing and then without nothing, because then again, you have a disadvantage to the black market. You should at least be able to talk about the product, either via bud tenders or via information, and also explain the differences in genetics and the differences in products to actually give advice to the customers. Because if you don't do that, we believe, again, you have a disadvantage to the market. What do we believe will happen? We actually believe that the government will pick a phased approach. And this is nothing I come up with. It's something that I heard from definitely 4 different health political speakers in the different parliamentary groups, that many of them say, let's start with pharmacies, maybe for half a year, maybe for 1 year. Let's see how that goes. And if you see there are big gaps in the availability, then we allow dispensaries to apply as well. I think it will not be the best, because that will mean that we will have a very limited availability in the beginning, and that can't be good. However, that's our gut feeling right now of where the government will go. We did not dare to forecast the license model. I just mentioned it, if it's kept or unkept. We heard different signals from government officials and parliamentarians right now. So that is something that we believe is still completely open. Will there be an unlimited amount of stores? Will we have at some point 20,000 dispensaries in Germany? Will it be maybe limited and we'll have 1,000? I think that's something that's completely open. From everyone we talked in the government, we heard e-commerce will not be possible. Everyone said it. And the thing is, sometimes you are positively surprised and you think like, well, they say one thing and then they surprise you positively. I think we will not have a positive surprise here. I think it's too far of a stretch for the government to go that way and really allow e-commerce. However, one thing that we heard from many parliamentarians, what they're open to, is in order again to compete with the black market, you have to offer the same convenience level like your black market dealer is providing. So that means if I'm sitting on a Saturday evening in my couch and say like, I want cannabis now, my dealer could be theoretically there in half an hour. If I need to drive 20 kilometers to the next dispensaries, I will not go. So that's the reason why the government already has understood that we need to have the same convenience level like the illicit market. And that's the reason why they seem very open and already discussed that, to make it possible that at least people who are a customer of a dispensary can be also delivered from the dispensary. I think that's really, really interesting, because that's not really e-commerce, but that's kind of local quick commerce, similar to what Gorillas, Made, or Flink are doing in Germany. So I think that could be very interesting and could be a huge opportunity for the industry too, and also for the pharmacies that are actually jumping on that train. Marketing-wise, I also don't have good news. Whoever we talked to said that actually marketing should not be allowed at all, or very, very limited. So that is something that we hear as well, that actually the government right now thinks even about limiting tobacco and alcohol advertising more. So we don't believe that they will limit on the other hand, on the one hand, but then on the other hand, make it very free for cannabis. So I think there will be only a very limited amount of advertising possible, if even at all. So the next topic, sourcing and production. So again, that's for us, or for me, one of the most interesting ones, because sourcing is obviously something that we as a cannabis company can prepare, right? So we can already, if we would know where the product can come from, we would send like our purchasing team there and we try to close everyone. However, unfortunately, the future or the reality is a bit more complex. I don't want to go into the legal details. Peter was actually mentioning them already in detail about all the different international laws. However, even here, we see different scenarios that we think should be in the back of our mind to think about what can happen. So the number one is probably the one that would be the most attractive one for the local German cultivators that have the licenses today. It would be only EU GMP German cultivation would work. I don't really think it's realistic because the capacities are small. EU GMP, even though we hear that actually some companies can produce very cheaply, but EU GMP as a standard on a scalable level is more expensive than it would be from other sources. So the question is at the end, if we see that the government wants to have 4 to 6 euros tax per gram on top of that, will we really have prices that can compete with the illicit market? I don't think so. And I also think if Israel allows GACP for the medical flowers, wouldn't it be ridiculous if Germany only allows EU GMP for the recreational flowers? So I think that is something that I think if the government does the hearings this week and this month, and some of the hearings are about international experiences, I think it will be pretty clear that this option is rather unrealistic. The German grow, on the opposite, I think is something that's very realistic due to the legal restrictions plus the desire from the government to actually do a German industry to build up. So I think it will not only be the German grow, but it can be also the German grow. I'm pretty sure about that. The question is again, if it will be in the first stage or the second stage. Third one is the EU grow. Means that Portugal and other EU countries will be possible, but we know the problem with Schengen, we know the problem with the EU Narcotics Drug Convention, so that as well. And then the last one, the global EU GMP, our current medical supply chain, also difficult because many of the countries who currently produce EU GMP globally, again, have not legalized recreationally, so they cannot actually import or export in the sense of recreational cannabis in Germany. So our view as a company, and again, it's just our view, is it will be a limited global supply chain. So in our opinion, the countries who have already legalized or will legalize, those countries will go into a so-called inter se procedure with Germany, and they will have bilateral contracts to actually import and export between those two countries or those countries. So the countries where this would in theory be possible right now with, ignoring EU law, would be Uruguay and Canada. If we look a few years in the future, it might also be Portugal, it might also be Luxembourg if they ever grow themselves, it might be also at some point be South Africa, but in our opinion, this right now is the most realistic one, or maybe even the combination between limited global and EU, and that would probably play to the benefit of Portugal if the Portuguese government is deciding to legalize recreational as well. So again, not wanting to go too much into details about, obviously, as a company, we prefer a market with many potential sources. We also like Germany opening up for cultivation because I think it's good for the country to also have their own grow. And we don't believe that the recreational cannabis needs to be produced by EU GMP. We rather believe it will be GACP plus quality standards of the final product, microbiology, and so on and so far, similar to what today's nutritional standards and cosmetic standards are as well. On the other hand, what we believe it will be happen, I think, again, it will be a phased approach. I think it's unrealistic in the first year of legalization to fulfill the complete demand from German cultivation. Maybe I'm getting proven wrong. However, I strongly believe that Germany will do contracts with an inter se procedure. I heard already that Germany and Portugal are talking about it, also talking about together with the UN to see if something like that would be acceptable. The Portuguese government wants to legalize recreational cannabis, and the fact that the governments are already talking at least means that they are thinking about this already. So I think the inter se procedure is something that's very realistic. We also, again, believe it will not EU GMP. And finally, we currently do not believe that import from countries that have not legalized will be possible. So it means in the EU, Denmark is probably difficult. Portugal will only be possible if they legalize. But other countries that we source medicinal cannabis from today, Australia, Colombia, Macedonia, if they don't legalize, it will be hard to import from them. Last but not least, scenarios for product. And I think that's an interesting one because whenever I hear the public discussion, I never hear about that. Either people don't think that far yet, or people just think by definition it will be flowers. I actually think there are several scenarios, and we've seen that in Canada, we've seen that in California, Oregon, but also other countries. So the base scenario would be flowers only. And I think from what I hear in the industry, that's what most companies believe will happen. If we talk to government officials, I was actually surprised how open the government was towards non-flower products. So, of course, the funny thing is the most criticism I heard was actually from many politicians that they will not accept gummy bears with THC because it's too close to a children's product, and if it's lying around on the kitchen table, the risk will be too high that actually toddlers or babies or children will eat the gummies. I don't know if that's a real concern or not, because I haven't heard any bad news from the US about this happening, but you never know. However, obviously flour is easy to regulate and easy to control, and there's already experience in the market with that due to the medical supply chain. On the other hand, what the government would indirectly do, they would promote smoking with that. And that's something that also the government wants to avoid. So another option very close would be flowers and pre-rolls. Again, I think that's very close, and I think that's definitely something that could be happening. However, vape liquids, you might think it's obvious. It's not that obvious. In my opinion, always I thought, okay, vape liquids, of course, are not healthy. And you also cannot say that they are healthier than smoking. However, when we talk to government officials, especially addiction politicians and people in the health committees, they strongly believe that you should never, ever put vaping in a better status than smoking, because that will show that vaping is somehow good. And that's the reason why what we heard is actually that vaping is almost a non-topic for the government at the moment, before the hearings, before the whole process, because they actually still kind of think about the US vaping scandal, about the people who died because of illegal THC vapes. And that is still something that we feel they are primed about. And I think it will take a bit of effort, if the industry wants it, from the industry to actually change the minds of the politicians here. And then the last one would be inhalation plus edibles, meaning we will allow everything from day one, from cookies to drinks to chocolate to water solubles to vaping liquids. And as much as I would love that scenario, I think we are still in Germany after all, and Germans are unfortunately very risk averse, and I think that will not happen due to the reasons that the German government will be afraid that you will convince too many non-smokers who have never had contact with cannabis suddenly to enter the market, and suddenly the market of cannabis consumers are growing, and then they didn't meet their target to actually bring things down. So what we believe, again, we believe it will be flowers and pre-rolls in step one, based on what we heard. However, we also learned that the process is still very early in the beginning, so obviously the government is still forming an opinion, but that, in our opinion, seems to be the most likely way. So obviously our position is do everything. However, we believe that, again, we will come to a phased approach similar to what Canada did. Again, starting with flowers, see how it goes, see how the consumption patterns develop, and then potentially after 6 months, 1 year, depending, going really into other segments. And I really hope that vaping will be part of the first phase. However, we believe that the maximum probability of that would be 60% based on what we hear right now. Good, so these are the 3 areas. Again, this list was not MECE, like mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, so some other people might hear other things, but that's our current opinion, what we work towards as a company to actually enter the market and see where we actually need to prepare in order to be in the pole position for the year of the legalization, may it be 2023, may it be 2024. Very quickly, what we will also believe, I don't believe Germany will leave the UN Narcotic Drug Convention. We hear from the government that they think now in the time of the Ukraine war, it's not good to leave anything UN related, because it will show a sign of non-solidarity to other UN countries. So they will try to find a workaround similar to Uruguay and Canada. And my opinion is that they will do the inter se procedure or the inter se modification, having contracts with other countries. What we hear, and that's very interesting, also if you do lobbying, which I will encourage you to, because at the end of the day, we're one industry and we have to work for this goal together. We see that there are big differences between the government parties right now. The Green and the Liberals, surprisingly, because they're normally not agreeing on anything else, on that topic, they're fully aligned. They want to make it as liberal as possible, and they will allow as much as possible. The SPD, the Social Democrats on the other side, from our perspective, we really hear that they are conservative. They want to keep it on the medical supply chain. They are more into pharmacies. So at the end, like everything in politics, it will be a compromise. However, I think when you think about who you should talk to in your local government, in your local provinces in Germany, I think the Social Democrats are the one that need most convincing. I also think that there will be a maximum amount of cannabis per month. Currently, it's a discussion if it's 30 grams and 60 grams. I think that is still some of the open topics that they will discuss. I believe it will be 30 grams, but then I'm wondering how they will measure that. Will you show your ID at every dispensary and then they will somehow like align that in a central database? I don't think so. If you look into Canada, look into the Netherlands, different model, different idea, different processes, but there you can buy 5 grams. I think something like that will also happen in Germany because no one can really control how much you have at home. I think also the legalization, and normally I'm an optimist, but when I hear Marco Buschmann, our Minister of Justice, who said it will happen in Q2, Q3 2023, I don't believe that. We just heard from Peter how long the processes go. I think if I'm really optimistic, I would say it will be the 4th quarter of next year. However, I rather believe it will be 2024, even if everything goes well. And to be honest, one thing that I hear all the time is that the biggest obstacle will be the Bundesrat, like the second German chamber, who is dominated by CDU-governed countries, like Conservative Party-governed countries. But if you had heard the recent news, the CDU is currently changing their mind about cannabis in total. The former chairman of the Health Committee of the German Bundestag, Erwin Rüddel, is one of the most prominent conservative health politicians. He sent a position paper to the CDU parliamentary group yesterday saying we should support the cannabis reform, but we should actually negotiate of how this will happen. And I think really the Bundesrat will not stop that law. However, what I think there will be probably a lot of negotiations between the government and the opposition to buy that acceptance in the Bundesrat. Another one, I think we just heard it, EU legal framework will be the biggest challenge. I think UN Narcotics Drug Convention we can solve not easily, but there's a clear way. The other hand, Schengen, and we saw that in Luxembourg 2 years ago that they wrote back and said like, we can't do it as we wanted. If there's no clever people who find workarounds here, that will probably be the biggest obstacle. I also think that CBD will not become fully legal in every form. I know that this is something that really many people hope for in the industry, that once THC is legal, CBD automatically will be legal on top of that. However, CBD is a novel food. It's a EU topic. What I can probably believe is that CBD will be allowed in dispensaries as part of a new cannabis law. However, I still believe that it will not be the case that suddenly CBD can be legal in every form in every retail outlet. And last but not least, I disagree with Peter. I don't think that cannabis will be a narcotic anymore. So I think maybe you saw it in the press, but we as Sanity Group are participating in the Swiss model project. So we'll run a dispensary in Switzerland. And what the Swiss do is they put it out of their local BTMG, like their narcotic law. And I think that's the only way to make it actually easier to trade, easier to handle, and will actually make a lot of things easier. And that's the reason why I hope and think that Germany will follow that example. However, I mean, that was one of the questions. I think that will not only have consequences for the recreational market, but actually putting it out of the narcotic law will also have a lot of consequences for the medical market in a good way, because then suddenly the administrative processes of actually doing a prescription in the medical market will be much easier than they've been before. I think I'm over time, so I'm also done here. Again, there was just a collection of thoughts in a structured way that we took back from government discussions over the last 3 to 6 months. At the end of the day, what I mentioned, no one really knows. So we are just at the start of this. On the bad news, there's a lot of challenges. The good news is there's a strong willingness of the government that we really feel a lot of enthusiasm to bring that law over the like finish line. And I think it will happen, but let's work all together as an industry to make it a good law. Thank you very much.